A reading from the Gospel of Luke. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. A greedy man was more in love with his money than his wife. She knew this, not only through daily experience, but because he made her promise that when he died, she would put all of his money into the casket with him and bury it with him. Well, the man eventually dies, and here is the widow sitting at the graveside, dressed in black, next to her best friend. They begin to lower the casket into the ground, and all of a sudden she yells, "Stop!" And they stop, and she pulls out an old shoebox and says, "Please put this in the casket with him." And they open it up and they put it in and they lower the casket down, and her friend sitting next to her and who knows all about this is just aghast, and she says, "Are you going to let that crazy, stingy old man get away with this? Did you really do what he asked you to do?" And she said, "Look, I'm trying to be a good Christian. I promised to do this, and I can't lie, so I went ahead." She said, I gathered up all the money, I went down to the bank, and I deposited it in my account, and I wrote him a check. Now, you know the old saying, you can't take it with you. But some of us live as if we can. Or we would do a better job of thinking about what happens with our wealth after we're gone, or at least in our later years, right? I believe in and practice financial planning. And I think you should too. So Kim and I, for instance, we both have wills, and most of it is going to go to the kids, as it should. But it's not just family, it's also family of faith. The church is included too, because you are our family and we want to look after generations to come in that way as well. Each of us has some life insurance. We also have long-term care insurance. In the event that if we're fortunate enough to live long enough, maybe we'll be able to afford to go live with Dot Laux. You know, one of those places where there's like continuing levels of care that otherwise we might not be able to afford, right? So we also have retirement accounts that we've been paying into for all these years, and the church has too. If I haven't thanked you for that, thank you for that. We're hoping to be able to plan well enough to live someday modestly well without relying too much on our kids. Wealth management is a booming business in the financial sector. Private wealth management really took off in the early 1980s where they began to realize that there was an opportunity to help people with high personal net worth to manage their affairs for the future. Things like investment strategies and estate planning and tax avoidance. These are things that are provided by private wealth managers to help people with accumulated possessions. But now the beautiful thing is that the things they learned about that have actually trickled down to the masses, so that wealth management can be something that all of us can do as well, because the lessons learned from the experiences of the rich can be applied to the average person, because in some ways, F. Scott Fitzgerald was wrong in saying the rich are different from us. Right? Managing wealth is a wise and responsible Christian practice. But according to Jesus, it may also be dangerous to our souls. Take heed, he says to us. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. I wish he were only talking to the rich, but I believe he's talking to all of us. And now we've reached the last of 3 sermons in this series called Life in the Commonwealth of Christ. We looked first at defeating debt, then last week at practicing generosity, and this week managing wealth. If you've been on vacation or gone for some reason, I hope you'll find reason to see them all or look into them all, because they all, I think, are important to our spiritual lives. Because they tell us what's crucial about who we are and how we live. All 3 of these ask us to put our trust in God to provide for us everything we need in order that we can experience the abundant life that Christ promises to us. What I want you to think about today is this: Jesus is your primary wealth manager. He is the one we should be listening to first and last, for time and eternity. Our text today gives us a picture of what's at stake. A certain man is concerned about his future. He wants his brother to divide his inheritance with him and to give him his share. Now, this may seem strange to you, but in that culture, they lived according to the law of primogeniture, which is to say that a father who died, all of his estate would pass to the eldest son entirely. Now, this doesn't sit well with the younger brother. Can you imagine? Right? And he thinks it's only right that he should have a share in his father's inheritance too. Now, we don't know if it was common practice that even though that was the law, the rule of the time, that brothers would do the right thing and share with the others. It seems only just, but the custom apparently didn't require it. Now, Jesus tells the man that he is not prepared to spend his messianic authority on settling financial disputes. Instead, he points to a deeper spiritual concern: whether the man is allowing his possessions to possess him. This is a problem we all have to guard against. Do we manage our wealth, or does our wealth manage us? Money can own us instead of we owning our money. Right? We start figuring that we are what we have, and that ends up taking our eyes off the real prize. This is why Jesus tells us to make purses for ourselves that don't wear out, treasures stored in heaven where neither moth nor rust corrupt and thieves cannot break in and steal, because no matter how secure you think your earthly investments are, there is always risk involved, and the only real safe investment in the end is heavenly. Jesus tells a parable about a farmer who had a magnificent harvest. What does he do with this liquidity event? Right? Well, he sees it as a windfall that is a way to secure his own future. And that future would be qualitatively different from anything he has known in his life up to that point. He comes into this great deal of money, and his first instinct was to think how to use it to make his life easier for the rest of his life. I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones in order to protect my assets. From now on, I can live off of what I have accumulated. I don't have to work anymore. I don't have to worry anymore. I don't have to depend upon the earth or the rains or the harvest. I don't have to even concern myself with neighbors who don't have enough to eat. I now can just sit back and relax. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's where that phrase comes from, don't you know? But look at what this does to him. It changes him. Money always changes us. It can be for good as well as ill, you know. That quotation from Scott Fitzgerald I cited earlier, it comes from a short story he wrote in 1925 called The Rich Boy. Here's a fuller version of it. Let me tell you about the very rich, he says. They are different from you and me. They possess and enjoy early, and it does something to them. Makes them soft where we are hard, and cynical where we are trustful, in a way that unless you were born rich, it's very difficult to understand. They think deep in their hearts that they are better than we are because we had to discover the compensations and refuges of life for ourselves. Even when they enter deep into our world or sink below us, they still think that they are better than we are. They are different. Some years later, Ernest Hemingway responded to that in a short story of his own. Here's what he said. The rich were dull, and they drank too much, or they played too much backgammon. They were dull, and they were repetitious. He remembered poor Scott Fitzgerald and his romantic awe of them, and how he had started a story once that began, "The very rich are different from you and me," and how someone had said to Scott, "Yes, they have more money." But that was not humorous to Scott. He thought they were a special glamorous race, and when he found they weren't, it wrecked him as much as any other thing had wrecked him. Jesus doesn't want riches to wreck us. Wealth, honestly gained, is a gift from God to be managed in a way that brings people together in a great economy of common prosperity, not as a way to make one person look down on another as if we have nothing in common. Now, maybe the man who approached Jesus was right about his brother. Maybe his brother was guilty. Maybe not according to the law, but guilty of hoarding his wealth and not sharing it. Here's the thing. We can't work on other people. We can only work on ourselves. Ultimately, Jesus doesn't talk to the brother. He talks to this man and to those who are listening, and he puts the focus where it belongs. The wealthy have to guard their hearts against greed. But here's the thing. So do all of us. It's not about how much money you have. You can be greedy with a lot of money or greedy with a little. It's not a question of how much we have, it's a question of how each of us uses what we have. So, does the way you look at your possessions deepen your faith in God's faithfulness? Or does it create in you a greater fear that you will not have enough unless you act in your best interest always? Does the way you manage your wealth bring you into richer relationships with other people? Or does it only become a way of measuring your value over against other people, whether up or down? The antidote to this is in Jesus' counsel. Sell your possessions and give alms. Now, notice he talks about possessions, not income. Most of us give our tithes out of our income stream. But we've talked about practicing generosity last week and that regular practice. Notice here, Jesus challenges us even to use our accumulated wealth to give. Almsgiving is giving to the needy. It is a matter of giving to the needy for their own sake, not to bring glory and honor to you. If you give to others, especially to the needy, what you are doing then is giving them an opportunity to experience the abundant provision of God through you. Now, I don't know why God set the world up the way God did. I mean, it would seem to me that God could have designed things in such a way that each of us and all of us got the same all the time, right? And then we'd have no problems. Yeah. There could be a few other problems, right? But maybe God desires us to learn something about what to do with our desires. And this is a test. It may just be another way in which God tests us at the very heart of our humanity. Whether we will reflect the divine image and likeness of God, which is deeply generous at heart, or break faith with God by taking care of only ourselves. The great Jewish sage Maimonides saw the truth about how almsgiving affects the giver as well as the receiver. He created a kind of ladder of giving, he called it. Has 8 rungs on the ladder. The lowest level of giving is giving grudgingly. So at least it's giving, right? The highest level of giving is giving in such a way that the receiver becomes self-reliant and thereby is able to join in the giving process too. Along the way up the ladder are movements about giving's motivation, about whether the giver is known, about what kind of benefits accrue to the giver, and all of that as you become more selfless in your giving and more focused on the other. But the point is that as we mature in managing our wealth, we can be changed for the better, too. I saw a remarkable movie this week that is soon to come out in wider release. Gleason is the story of Steve Gleason, who is a retired NFL player for the New Orleans Saints. He was a great special teams player and a tremendous athlete. But after he retired, he contracted the dreaded disease known as ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. When Steve got his diagnosis, he knew his life would be cut short, and he understood that the decline before his death would be an awful reality of being trapped inside a body that will not respond any longer to your still unaffected and active brain. Steve and his wife Michelle were trying to conceive a child when he received this diagnosis. And they made the decision to go ahead and have a child nonetheless. Their son Rivers was born in October of 2011, and right away, upon that news that he was conceived, Steve began a video journal for his son. And he made this his life work. He wanted his son to know that he was loved, and he wanted him to know who his dad is while he could still communicate with him. He believed that the most important thing he could do with his remaining life was to be able to pass on to his son the wealth of wisdom that he had gained along the way, as long as he could tell him. That video journal became a movie that you can go and see. My only suggestion to you, if you do, is bring a hanky. Maybe two. What you'll find is that this disease and this project changes Steve, too, and for the better. Managing our wealth, whether we're talking about accumulated wisdom or possessions, is a spiritual act of love that is directed toward holy purposes. It's certainly true that you can't take it with you, but it's also true that what you leave behind and how you leave it will define your legacy. Amen.